My name is Alistair, though for years my favorite title was Grandpa. I'm 81 years old, and I remember standing in the rain on the day my son, Evander, told us his daughter was a burden he wouldn't carry. He said the world was too cruel for a child like her, but this story doesn't end in the rain. It ends under the bright lights of a grand opening, with a ribbon stretched in front of a building called Blythe Dynamics. And as the cameras flashed, they captured a moment I still can't forget. There was my granddaughter, the brilliant CEO. And there, standing just outside the circle of light, was my son, the father who walked away, now hoping to be let back in. I'm going to tell you how the little girl he left behind built an empire from the ground up, and how the greatest success is proving your worst critics wrong. But before I share our story of heartbreak and triumph, tell me, where are you watching from today? Please let me know in the comments. To everyone who supports this community, thank you. Your words mean more than you know. And if this is your first time here, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and hit the bell. You're not just joining a channel. You're joining a family that believes no one should suffer in silence. Now, let me tell you my story. It wasn't a thunderclap that announced the end of our family. It was the soft, steady drumming of rain on the clinic's window pane. I remember the condensation tracing paths down the glass, like the tears my son wouldn't shed. Era was 3 years old, a wisp of a thing with eyes the color of a winter sky, sitting on the floor, meticulously lining up a set of colored blocks. She wasn't just playing, she was ordering her universe, creating a symmetry the rest of us couldn't see. The doctor, a kind-faced woman with a weary posture, had just finished explaining the results of the evaluation. The word hung in the air between us. Autism. Evander, my son, stood by the door, a statue of rigid disapproval. He was always a man who valued efficiency, order, predictable outcomes. Era, in her beautiful silent complexity, was a variable his equations couldn't solve. So, what does this mean? Evander's voice was a cold scalpel, cutting through the doctor's careful compassion. For her future? For everything? The doctor spoke of therapies, of support, of focusing on her immense strengths, her incredible memory, her intense focus. But Evander wasn't listening to the potential. He was only hearing the challenges. On the drive home, the rain intensified, hammering on the roof of the car. The silence inside was heavier, more suffocating than any storm. Marigold, my daughter-in-law, sat in the back, clutching Era to her chest, her face a mask of quiet devastation. I sat in the passenger seat, watching my son's white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. That evening, after Era was finally asleep, the storm broke inside our home. "I can't do it," Evander said. He was standing in the living room, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. "I can't live this life." "What life, Evander?" Marigold's voice was a raw whisper. "The life with your daughter." "Don't," he snapped, his eyes flashing with a pain so deep it had curdled into anger. "Don't make this into something it's not. Look at her, Marigold. The world is a brutal, competitive place. It's hard enough for normal people. For her, it will be a nightmare, a constant uphill battle. She'll be a burden I did not sign up for." The word landed like a physical blow. Burden. I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at this man, my own child, and saw a stranger. "She's your daughter," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I could barely contain. "Your flesh and blood." "And that is my greatest regret," he shouted, turning on me. The veneer of the successful, controlled man was gone, revealing something terrified and small beneath. "I will not spend my life shackled to a broken child. I will not watch her fail. I will not have my name associated with that." He said the world was too cruel for her, but in that moment, I realized the cruelest thing in Era's world was standing right in front of us. He wasn't protecting her from the world. He was protecting himself from her. He left that night. He took a single suitcase and walked out into the rain, without a backward glance at his sleeping daughter, without a word of comfort to his shattered wife. The click of the front door closing was the quietest, most final sound I have ever heard. I stood there, in the sudden silence of the broken home, my heart not just broken, but pulverized. The man I raised was gone, and in his place he left a void, a little girl who didn't understand, and a chilling new title for me, the only father figure she would ever know. The weeks after Evander left were a blur of gray stillness, like living in the ashes after a fire. The house felt cavernous and haunted. Marigold moved through it like a ghost, her spirit broken. She'd perform the necessary tasks, feed Era, bathe her, dress her, but the light in her eyes had been extinguished. The betrayal was a sickness she couldn't shake. My rage was a cold, hard stone in my gut. Every time I thought of Evander, I saw his contemptuous sneer, heard the word burden. I would lie awake at night constructing elaborate speeches of condemnation, imagining the moment I would tell him exactly what a coward he was. That rage was the only thing that kept me from collapsing into the same despair that had claimed Marigold. But Era was our anchor to a reality beyond our grief. The world, in its profound irony, had given her a shield. Her autism, the very thing Evander had fled, meant she did not register his absence with the same agonizing clarity we did. She didn't cry for a father who was gone. She sought order, and his disappearance was simply a change in the pattern. A difficult one, disruptive, but not a cataclysm. Her needs were concrete, her world defined by routine, and in tending to those needs, Marigold and I were forced to keep living. Our lives became a quiet, two-person crusade. We learned to speak Era's language. We learned that her silence wasn't emptiness, but deep thought. We learned that her meltdowns in crowded supermarkets weren't tantrums, but a neurological firestorm from sensory overload. We learned to see the world through her senses, how a flickering fluorescent light was a torture device, how the hum of a refrigerator was a constant, grating symphony, how the texture of a certain food could make her physically recoil. We became her interpreters, her buffers against the cruel world Evander had feared. Marigold slowly began to emerge from her shell. It was Ira who drew her out. Era's needs were absolute, and they required a mother's absolute love. There was no room for self-pity when your child was looking at you, utterly lost because a single toy was out of place. In restoring order for Era, Marigold began to find a new, fractured order for herself. I remember one afternoon, about a year after the leaving. Era was sitting at the kitchen table, a pile of my wooden dominoes before her. She wasn't playing a game. She was sorting them. But it wasn't by number of pips or by color. She was running her fingers over the carved indents, feeling the subtle differences in depth, the tiny splinters in the cheap wood. She was creating categories I couldn't perceive. She'd place one domino in a pile, pause, feel another, and place it in a different pile with an unshakable certainty. Marigold and I watched her, a silent audience to this intricate, private ritual. And then Marigold did something I hadn't seen her do in a year. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "She sees a world we can't, Alistair," she whispered. It was the turning point. In that moment, we stopped seeing Era through the lens of Evander's diagnosis, as a list of deficits and challenges. We began to see her for what she truly was. Not broken, but differently wired. Not less, but other. And in that otherness, we began to suspect lay a unique and formidable kind of genius. Our mission was no longer just about protection. It was about excavation. We were determined to dig, with our bare hands if necessary, until we found the brilliant, hidden core of our girl. The small woodworking shop behind our house had always been my sanctuary. The scent of pine sawdust and linseed oil was the smell of peace. It was where I went to escape the complexities of the world, to create something simple and solid with my hands. For Era, it became a cathedral of logic. She was 8 years old when she started spending real time with me there. The chaos of the schoolyard was a torment to her, but the organized chaos of my workshop, the tools hanging in their specific places, the bins of screws and nails sorted by size, the ranks of lumber stacked by type, this was a universe she understood. She would sit for hours on an upturned crate, just watching. She never asked why like other children. Her questions were about function. What is the gear ratio for? Why is that clamp shaped differently? She wasn't satisfied with because it works. She needed to understand the underlying principle. The spark, the moment the dormant seed of blithe dynamics first put down a root, happened because of my own stubbornness. I was terrible with numbers. The books for my small business, orders, expenses, taxes, were a source of constant dread. I kept everything in a large, leather-bound ledger, a mess of scrawled numbers and misplaced receipts. Every Sunday night, I'd sit at my desk, my glasses perched on my nose, and grumble my way through it, always ending up with a headache and a lingering fear that I was making a costly mistake. One Sunday, Era was with me. She stood beside my chair, silent and observing, as I cursed under my breath, trying to find a calculation error for the third time. "You are inefficient, grandfather." Her voice, so clear and matter-of-fact, startled me. It wasn't a criticism, just a statement of observable fact, like noting that the sky was blue. I chuckled, a tired sound. "I know, my dear, but it's the only system I have." She was quiet for another minute, her eyes scanning the pages of my ledger, her fingers tracing the columns of numbers. Then, without a word, she walked away. I thought nothing of it until the next day. When I came into the shop, she was already there, sitting at my old computer, a machine I only used for basic email. The screen, which I usually saw as a cluttered mess, was now filled with neat, color-coded cells and boxes. "I have made you a new system," she announced. I leaned over her shoulder, my skepticism warring with my curiosity. What she had built in a few hours was breathtaking. It was a simple database. She had created categories for materials, labor, overhead, and client invoices. She had built formulas that automatically calculated profit margins, tax obligations, and even tracked inventory levels. She had taken the chaotic, terrifying puzzle of my finances and transformed it into a clean, logical, self-updating map. My hands trembled as I used the mouse to navigate her creation. It was more than just efficient, it was a work of art, a profound, logical art. "Era, this is... How did you know how to do this?" She shrugged, her focus still on the screen. "The patterns were wrong. I fixed the patterns." I looked from the screen to her face, then back to the screen. The cold, hard stone of rage in my gut that I'd carried for 5 years didn't dissolve, but it was joined by something else, something hot and bright and powerful. It was vindication. This burden, this child my son had discarded as broken, had just accomplished in one night what had baffled me for decades. That night, I showed Marigold. We sat together at the computer, watching as Era calmly demonstrated her system. Marigold's hands flew to her mouth and she began to cry, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of fierce, triumphant joy. "He was wrong, Alistair," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He was so terribly, tragically wrong." We didn't know what it meant for the future. We didn't dare dream of empires or headlines. But in that moment, in the glow of that computer screen, we saw a path forward. We saw that Era's mind wasn't a prison. It was a powerful, untapped engine. And our job was no longer just to protect her. It was to fuel that engine and get ready for the day she decided to fly. Of course, if you have made it this far, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Now, let's get back to the story. The decade that followed was a slow, deliberate unfurling of a rare and beautiful flower. Era's mind, once a locked room, was now a workshop of dazzling activity. The system she built for my shop was just the beginning. She moved from my ledgers to the world itself, dissecting its inefficiencies with a surgeon's calm precision. She optimized our grocery shopping routes to save 12 minutes and 3.7 miles of driving per week. She rewrote the instruction manual for our temperamental boiler, turning its cryptic symbols into a flowchart so clear a child could follow it. Marigold was the heart, and I was the hands, but Era was the emerging architect of our small world. We learned to stand back, to provide the materials she needed, and simply watch in awe as she constructed solutions to problems we didn't even know we had. Her blithe dynamics wasn't a company yet. It was the operating system of our lives, named for the quiet, joyful glint that had finally appeared in her mother's eyes. But the world outside our cocoon remained a hostile, over-stimulating place. High school was a particular kind of hell for her. The social cacophony, the arbitrary rules, the constant demand for eye contact and small talk, it was a daily assault. She would come home, pale and withdrawn, and retreat to her room for hours to decompress in silence. The school reports were a study in contradiction. Demonstrates a staggering grasp of mathematics and logic, followed by does not engage with peers and refuses to participate in group activities. The principal, a well-meaning but limited man, suggested we consider a more appropriate vocational track. "Not every child is cut out for academia, Mr. Alistair," he said, with a condescending pat on my shoulder. Perhaps a focus on life skills. I felt the old, familiar rage simmer. The ghost of Evander was in that room, nodding in agreement. A burden, not cut out for the real world. We pulled her out. Marigold, with a ferocity born of a mother's love, became her full-time teacher. We turned our home into a bespoke academy, tailored to the magnificent, unique shape of Era's intellect. We fed her textbooks on advanced physics, coding languages, and structural engineering. She consumed them not as a student, but as a peer, finding errors in proofs and suggesting more elegant lines of code. It was during this time that the second crack appeared in our fragile world. Marigold started getting tired, a deep, bone-aching fatigue that a good night's sleep couldn't fix. She dismissed it at first, attributing it to the stress of homeschooling. But then came the cough, a dry, persistent sound that seemed to scrape its way out of her lungs. Then the weight loss, so rapid her clothes began to hang on her frame. The diagnosis was a word as cold and final as the one we'd heard in Era's childhood clinic: mesothelioma, a rare, aggressive cancer. The doctor explained it was often linked to asbestos exposure, and I knew, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, the old community center where Marigold had volunteered for years, the one they'd torn down a decade ago, there had been rumors. The fight that followed was a brutal, desperate blur of hospitals and hope that curdled into despair. Through it all, Marigold's primary concern was Era. She was the engine of our family, and she was breaking down, terrified of what would happen to the precious cargo she was leaving behind. The end came in a hospice room that smelled of antiseptic and dying flowers. Marigold was a whisper of herself, her skin translucent against the white pillows. Era sat by the bed, holding her mother's hand, her face a mask of stoic confusion. She understood the biological process of death with a clinical detachment, but the impending, permanent absence was an equation with no solution. I was on the other side, holding Marigold's other hand, my own heart turning to dust. "Alistair," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle, "you have to promise me." "Anything, my dear, anything. Protect her, not just from the world, from him. He will come back, when he sees, when he realizes." She didn't have the strength to finish, but I knew. Evander would come back when he saw her success. His greed would outweigh his shame. I promised, pouring every ounce of my being into that single word. With a tremendous effort, she gestured weakly towards her small handbag on the chair. "In there, the envelope." I retrieved it. It was a simple manila envelope, brittle with age. Inside was a document that felt like a relic from another lifetime, their prenuptial agreement. My stomach churned. Why this? Why now? Page 7, Marigold breathed. The clause, sole enterprise and progeny. He was so proud of it. Thought it protected his future. Read it, Alistair. Remember it. I skimmed the dense legalese. My eyes, blurred with tears, could barely focus, but one paragraph seemed to leap from the page. It stated that any wealth, assets, or intellectual property generated solely by one signatory's independent enterprise, separate from marital assets, remained their sole property, irrevocably, and that this protection extended to any inheritance or wealth generated by said property for their direct descendants. In his obsessive drive to protect his own future fortune from a wife he already saw as a potential liability, Evander had built a fortress around Marigold and, by extension, Aira. He had legally walled himself off from anything they created on their own. The irony was so profound it was cruel. "He built his own cage, Alistair," Marigold whispered, a faint, bitter smile touching her lips. "Use it." She closed her eyes then, her strength spent. She passed 2 days later, quietly in her sleep. The grief was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket over our home. Ira retreated into a silence deeper than any I had seen since her childhood. We were two survivors huddled in the wreckage, the silence between us filled with the echoing absence of the woman who had held us together. I tucked the prenuptial agreement away in my safe deposit box. It felt like a cold, metallic secret, a weapon hidden in the graveyard of our happiness. In my raw grief, I couldn't bear to look at it. It was a tether to the man who had caused so much of this pain, and I wanted to forget it existed. I focused on the only thing that mattered, Aira. For a year, we simply existed in the quiet aftermath. The house was too big, the world too loud. Aira, now a young woman, spent her days in her room, her computer screen a constant blue glow in the darkness. I thought she was lost in grief, and perhaps she was. But she was also building. She emerged one afternoon and stood in the doorway of my workshop. I was sanding a piece of oak, the rhythmic sound a meditation against the silence. "I have an algorithm," she stated, her voice clear and direct, cutting through the dust-filled air. I put down the sandpaper. "An algorithm for what, Ira?" "For everything," she said without a trace of arrogance. It was, again, a simple statement of fact. Supply chains, global logistics. I have modeled the flow of goods from Shanghai to Rotterdam, from Chicago to Buenos Aires. The current systems are illogical. They waste 18.3% of their capacity on inefficiencies. My algorithm eliminates them. She led me to her computer. On the screen was a mesmerizing, complex web of light, a digital map of the world with countless glowing lines connecting hubs and ports. It was beautiful and utterly incomprehensible to me. "This is Blythe," she said, her finger tracing a glowing line across the Atlantic. "It learns. It adapts in real time to weather, port delays, fuel costs, geopolitical instability. It is the most efficient logistics model in the world." I looked from the dazzling, pulsing map to my granddaughter's serene, determined face. This was her monument, not just to her own intellect, but to her mother. She had channeled 5 years of isolated, focused work and a lifetime of seeing the world's hidden patterns into this single, world-changing creation. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "A lawyer and a programmer, not necessarily in that order." We used the last of Marigold's life insurance money. It felt like planting her final, most precious seed. We found Casper, a sharp, discreet lawyer who didn't flinch at Aira's direct manner and saw the billion-dollar potential in her work in under 5 minutes. We hired a small team of coders, not to build her vision, but to execute the architecture she had already meticulously designed on her own. Blythe Dynamics was incorporated. The launch wasn't a grand event. It was a quiet email, a few lines of code integrated into the systems of a small struggling shipping company as a beta test. The results were instantaneous and staggering. That company's efficiency soared, their profits doubling in a single quarter. Word spread like a shockwave through the industry. A reclusive, unknown genius had solved one of the global economy's most fundamental puzzles. The offers started as a trickle, then became a flood. Venture capitalists, tech giants, logistics conglomerates. They all came knocking, their eyes gleaming with avarice and curiosity. Ira, now the CEO, handled them all with the same calm detachment. She met them in our living room, explained the algorithm's capabilities in simple, unadorned facts, and dismissed their inflated offers with a wave of her hand. She wasn't interested in their money or their hype. She was interested in seeing her perfect system run. The headlines started to appear. The ghost of logistics solves a trillion-dollar problem. Who is the reclusive genius behind Blythe Dynamics? A business magazine managed to get a photo of her, a candid shot of her walking, head down, lost in thought. The caption read, "Era, the enigmatic architect of the future." I framed that article. I hung it in the living room, right next to a picture of Marigold. I would stand there and look at them both, the mother who had safeguarded the future and the daughter who was now building it. The quiet revenge was underway. It wasn't loud or angry. It was the relentless, humming efficiency of a perfect idea, and it was beginning to reshape the world. The pinnacle was the gala opening of the new Blythe Dynamics headquarters, a gleaming glass tower that stood as a monument to Era's mind. The press called it the nerve center of global trade. For me, it was the cathedral we had built from the shattered pieces of our lives. The night was a spectacle. Searchlights carved through the dusk and a red carpet led to the entrance. I wore a tuxedo that felt alien on my old frame, standing just behind Era as she, in a simple, elegant dress, prepared to cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed, a relentless strobe of light and sound that she endured with a fixed, distant smile. She was performing a necessary social ritual for the sake of her company, her mind already likely debugging the building's HVAC system. And then I saw him. He was standing just beyond the ring of light, half hidden in the shadow of a news van. Older, his hair silvered at the temples, his face etched with lines that hadn't been there 15 years ago. He was wearing a good suit, but he wore it like a costume. It was Evander. My blood ran cold. The roar of the crowd, the speeches, the music, it all faded into a dull hum. Marigold's final warning echoed in my ears. He will come back. He wasn't trying to approach the podium. He was just watching, his eyes fixed on Era with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't pride. It was calculation. Avarice. He was assessing a stock portfolio that had just yielded an unexpected astronomical return. The ceremony ended. Era was whisked away for interviews and photo ops inside. I stood my ground, a sentinel at the gate, as Evander finally emerged from the shadows and walked towards me. "Father," he said, his voice softer than I remembered, practiced in its contrition. "Evander." My own voice was a block of ice. "You're a long way from home." I read the articles, saw the news. She's incredible. He gestured vaguely towards the towering building. I had to come. I had to see for myself. "You've seen," I said, turning to go. "Wait." He put a hand on my arm. I flinched and he pulled it back as if burned. "Alistair, please. I know. I know what I did was unforgivable. I was a fool, a scared, selfish fool. But she's my daughter, my blood. I've missed everything." The audacity of it stole my breath. He wasn't here to apologize to her, to beg her forgiveness. He was here to state his biological claim to me, the gatekeeper. "You made your choice on a rainy day 15 years ago," I said, my voice low and shaking with a lifetime of suppressed fury. "You don't get to rewrite history now that the sun is shining." His mask of regret slipped, just for a second. I saw the cold, entitled man beneath. "This isn't about money, if that's what you think." "Isn't it?" I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You looked at a brilliant, successful woman, and your first thought wasn't, 'I'm proud.' It was, 'She's mine.' You see an empire, Evander. You never saw a daughter." He was silent for a moment, his jaw tight. The crowd around us was laughing, celebrating, utterly oblivious to the personal earthquake happening in their midst. "I want a chance to know her," he insisted, a new steel in his voice. "And if you or she try to deny me that—" "I have rights, Father. A father has rights. I'll assert my place in her life, by any means necessary." There it was, the threat. Marigold had been right. He wasn't asking, he was demanding, and he was prepared to use the legal system, the very concept of family he had spat on, to get a piece of what Era had built. I looked at him, this ghost from our past, and I felt not rage, but a cold, clear certainty. The weapon was in the vault. The cage he built was waiting. "Do what you feel you must, Evander," I said, my voice now eerily calm. "But know this. You started this war the day you walked away. You just didn't know you were arming the other side." I turned and walked into the bright, buzzing heart of my granddaughter's empire, leaving him standing alone in the dark. The battle lines were drawn. The final act was about to begin. The letter arrived 1 week later, a crisp, formal envelope that felt like a declaration of war. It was from a firm called Sterling & Vance, representing Mr. Evander Alastair. My hands did not shake as I opened it. They were steady with a cold, grim resolve. The language was dense, but the intent was clear as glass. A formal petition to the court to establish paternity and assert paternal rights, including a claim to a rightful share of the assets and future earnings of Era Alastair, given her diagnosed condition and his legal and moral responsibilities as a father. He was using her autism, the very thing he had fled from, as a legal foothold. The hypocrisy was so brazen it was almost impressive. He was arguing that her success was in part due to his genetic legacy, a legacy he had publicly and privately denounced for years. I didn't show Era the letter. She was in the most creative, productive period of her life, refining the Blythe algorithm for new markets. To burden her with this venom, felt like a betrayal. The ghost of her father was trying to haunt her, and my job was to be the exorcist. I called Casper. We met in his office, a room of dark wood and quiet efficiency that felt like the perfect war room. I slid the letter across his desk. He read it, his expression unchanging. When he finished, he looked up, his eyes sharp. He's aggressive, and he's using a very emotional, concerned father angle. It's a clever play. A judge who doesn't know the history might be sympathetic. "What do we do?" I asked, the weight of it all pressing down on my shoulders. "We fight," Casper said simply. "We gather every record, every report card, every doctor's note, every photograph of him missing from her life. We will paint a picture of absolute and total abandonment. But, Alistair," he leaned forward, steepling his fingers, "it will be messy. It will be public. The press will feast on it. Reclusive genius sued by estranged father. It could damage the company. It will definitely damage Era." The thought of Era on a witness stand, being cross-examined by some slick lawyer hired by her own father, made me feel physically ill. This was exactly what Marigold had feared. Not the loss of money, but the brutal shredding of her daughter's peace. "Is there another way?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Casper was silent for a long moment, tapping a pen on his desk. "There might be. You mentioned years ago that Marigold gave you something. A prenuptial agreement." A spark of memory, faint and buried under years of grief, flickered to life. The envelope, the brittle paper, Marigold's dying whisper. He built his own cage. "I have it," I said, a surge of adrenaline cutting through the despair. "In my safe deposit box." "Get it," Casper said, a predator's smile finally touching his lips. "Let's see what kind of cage he built." I drove to the bank, my heart hammering against my ribs. The vault was cold and silent. I retrieved the metal box, and there it was, nestled between my old passport and Marigold's wedding band, the manila envelope. It felt different now, not a relic of pain, but a shield. Back in Casper's office, he read the document, his eyes scanning the legalese with the speed of a seasoned expert. He flipped to page 7, his finger tracing the lines of the sole enterprise and progeny clause. He read it once, then twice. Then he let out a low, appreciative whistle. "Alistair," he said, looking up at me, his eyes wide with something akin to reverence. "This is it. This is the entire game." "I don't understand," I admitted. "How does a prenup between him and Marigold protect Era's company?" "Because of this line," he said, jabbing his finger at the page. "It states that any wealth generated solely by one spouse's independent enterprise is their sole property. And this protection extends to any inheritance or wealth generated by said property for their direct descendants." He looked at me, his expression triumphant. "Marigold used her inheritance to seed Era's company. That initial capital was her sole, separate property, protected by this clause. Every single asset of Blythe Dynamics, every dollar of profit, traces its lineage back to that protected seed capital. It is the tree that grew from Marigold's legally walled garden. Evander, by the terms of his own meticulously crafted agreement, has no more claim to it than he does to the crown jewels." The elegant, brutal justice of it settled over me. He hadn't just built a cage. He had planted the tree, poured the concrete, and welded the bars shut with his own hands, 15 years ago. "So what happens now?" I asked, a profound sense of peace washing over me. Casper picked up the threatening letter from Sterling and Vance. "Now," he said, a glint in his eye, "we spring the trap." Casper's response was a masterpiece of legal jujitsu. It wasn't a long, emotional rebuttal. It was a short, cold, and devastatingly precise document. It acknowledged receipt of their petition and, as a matter of relevant fact, attached a single, highlighted exhibit, page 7 of the prenuptial agreement. The covering letter contained only 2 sentences. "Our client's assets are protected under the terms of the attached agreement executed by your client. We suggest you advise your client of the severe financial and ethical consequences of pursuing frivolous litigation." We heard nothing for 72 hours. The silence was deafening. I imagined the scene at Sterling and Vance, the confused associates, the furious partner, and Evander being shown the document that severed his own lifeline. Then my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize, but I knew. I knew it was him. I answered. "Alistair." His voice was ragged, stripped of all its practiced composure. It was the raw, panicked sound of a man who had just seen the ground disappear beneath his feet. "What is this, Father? What kind of game are you playing?" "This isn't a game, Evander," I said, my voice calm. I was sitting in my armchair, looking out at the garden Marigold had loved. "This is the consequence. You're reading the fine print on your own life." This can't be enforceable," he sputtered. "That was for me and Marigold. It has nothing to do with Era." "Read it again," I said softly. "You specifically extended the protection to direct descendants. You were so afraid Marigold would have a child that would drain your future wealth. You legally orphaned that child from your own fortune before she was even born. You thought you were building a moat. You were actually digging your own grave." There was a long silence on the other end, broken only by his ragged breathing. I could almost hear the crumbling of his entire world. The money he had coveted, the empire he felt entitled to, was forever out of reach, barred by his own signature. "I'll fight it," he whispered, but the threat was empty now, a ghost of its former self. "Go ahead," I said, a lifetime of pain and disappointment finally finding its release. "Take it to a judge, please. I would love to sit in a courtroom and watch you explain to a stranger why the contract you wrote to protect yourself from your autistic daughter should now be voided because that autistic daughter became a millionaire. I'd pay to see that." The line went dead. He had hung up. The formal letter from Sterling and Vance arrived 2 days later. It was a single paragraph. They were withdrawing their petition without prejudice. It was a total, unconditional surrender. Casper called me. "It's over. He has no legal leg to stand on. If he ever shows his face again, we have this to hold over him forever. He's finished." I thanked him, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. It was closure. A deep, final, resounding click, like a lock sliding home. I went to Era's study. She was at her computer, the ever-shifting globe of the Blythe algorithm glowing on her screen. "Era," I said, "there's something I need to tell you." She turned, her gaze clear and attentive. I told her everything. About the letter, about the lawsuit, about the prenuptial agreement and the clause her mother had safeguarded. I told her about the phone call and his surrender. I did not shield her from the ugliness. She deserved to know the strength of the fortress that protected her, built brick by the love of her mother and the stunning short-sightedness of her father. She listened, her expression never changing. When I finished, she was silent for a full minute, processing. "So," she said finally, her voice as calm as if she were discussing the weather, "the variable has been neutralized." I blinked, and then a laugh, a real, genuine laugh, burst out of me. It was the perfect, most Era summary possible. "Yes, my dear," I said, wiping a tear from my eye. "The variable has been neutralized." The story doesn't end with a dramatic reunion or a tearful forgiveness. Life isn't a fairy tale, and some wounds are too deep to ever truly heal. They become scars, a part of your landscape, a reminder of a battle you survived. Evander disappeared from our lives as completely as he had the first time. We heard through the grapevine that he had moved to another country, a place with no extradition treaty and, presumably, no headlines about his brilliant daughter. It was a fitting end for him, a final, cowardly retreat. Blythe dynamics continued to thrive, not in spite of Era's unique mind, but because of it. She never learned to make small talk at galas, but she could pinpoint a market inefficiency from 1,000 miles away. The world of business, which had always seemed so chaotic and human to me, made perfect, logical sense to her. It was just another system to be optimized. I am 81 years old now. My body is slower, my sight a little less sharp, but my evenings are my treasure. Era and I still live in the same house, the one that holds the ghosts of our past and the quiet peace of our present. Most nights, after her work is done, she will come and sit with me in the living room. She doesn't speak much. She might work on a complex knot puzzle or simply watch the fire, but she is there, and I am there. We don't need to fill the silence with words. The silence between us is not empty. It is full. It is filled with the memory of Marigold's love. It is filled with the hum of the empire we built from heartbreak. It is filled with the unshakable knowledge that we are a family. Sometimes I look at her, this formidable, self-possessed woman, a titan of industry, and I still see the little girl lining up her blocks, creating order from chaos. Her father saw that child and saw a burden. I saw a universe of potential. He thought the world was too cruel for her. He was wrong. The world was simply too loud, too illogical, too demanding of a mind that operated on a higher, purer frequency. We didn't change her to fit the world. We helped her build a world that could finally fit her. His revenge was wanting what he could never have. Ours was living a life so full, we never noticed he was gone. So, you see, this was never just a story about money or a business empire. It was a story about the two most powerful forces in the universe, a love that refuses to quit, and the stunning, predictable irony of a man who was ultimately defeated by the one thing he valued above all else, his own self-interest. And let me tell you, watching that truth dawn on him, That was a justice no court in the world could ever provide. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. I will see you in the next one.